The words hit him like a slap in the middle of an ordinary morning, sharp enough to echo long after the sound faded. The sun was already high, pouring clean daylight over the quiet street, children's bicycles lying on their sides, curtains fluttering gently in open windows, and life moving on as if nothing had happened. Yet in that single moment, when his neighbor's voice carried across the fence and landed on him with unexpected force, everything inside him shifted. "Stop flirting with me." It wasn't shouted, but it didn't need to be. The tone alone was enough to freeze him where he stood, a single father holding a mug of coffee he'd forgotten to drink, suddenly aware that the entire block seemed to be holding its breath. What happened next, and what he chose to do afterward, would ripple far beyond that fence, shocking a community and quietly changing lives in ways no one could have predicted. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of human connection, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Matters. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Evan Calder hadn't planned on becoming the center of neighborhood attention. He hadn't planned on much of anything beyond getting through each day without failing his son. At 37, his life was built around routines that kept chaos at bay. Wake before sunrise, pack lunches, double-check homework, iron shirts, and make sure breakfast happened even when money was tight and sleep was scarce. Since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, mornings were his battleground. Grief never left him, but it learned to sit quietly in the background while responsibility took over. The small rented house on Juniper Lane wasn't much, but it was clean, sunlit, and filled with reminders of why he kept going. Crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, a calendar marked with school events, and the sound of his son's laughter bouncing off the walls were the pillars holding him upright. Juniper Lane was the kind of street that looked peaceful on the surface, but buzzed with unspoken opinions underneath. Neighbors waved, smiled, and exchanged pleasantries, but everyone noticed everything. Who left early, who came home late, whose lawn wasn't trimmed, whose lights stayed on past midnight. Evan had always tried to blend in, keeping his head down and his interactions polite but brief. He knew how easily whispers could turn into judgments, and he didn't have the energy to defend himself from people who didn't know his story. Being a single father already felt like standing under a magnifying glass, especially in a place where traditional family structures were quietly expected. Across the narrow fence lived Marisol Hart, a woman whose presence was as steady as the morning sun. She was in her early 30s, a freelance illustrator who worked from home, her days marked by long hours at a drafting table and frequent breaks spent outside with a sketchbook. Evan noticed her first in small, harmless ways. The way she watered her plants every morning at the same time he packed his son's lunch. The way she smiled at his son when he rode his scooter down the driveway. The way she always seemed to notice when someone needed help carrying groceries or fixing a loose fence board. Their interactions were minimal at first, polite nods and casual greetings, the kind that barely registered as anything more than neighborly courtesy. But life has a way of building connections through repetition. Over weeks and months, those small moments stacked up. Evan would offer to hold a gate, while Marisol wheeled in supplies. She would hand over extra vegetables from her garden, saying she had more than she could use. Sometimes their mornings overlapped just enough for a brief conversation about the weather, the neighborhood, or the challenges of working from home. Evan didn't see it as flirting. He saw it as kindness, a rare and welcome softness in a life that had been sharp-edged for too long. What Evan didn't realize was how closely others were watching. On Juniper Lane, gestures were interpreted through personal lenses, and assumptions grew quickly. A widowed father showing consistent friendliness toward a single woman became a story before it ever became a reality. Whispers started quietly. A glance held a little too long. A smile misread. People filled in the blanks with their own imaginations, and soon, what Evan thought of as harmless warmth was being labeled something else entirely. The morning Marisol told him to stop flirting, Evan was already carrying the weight of exhaustion. His son had been sick the night before, and sleep had come in fragments. He was standing by the fence, offering to fix a loose latch he'd noticed earlier when her words landed. They weren't cruel, but they were firm, edged with something defensive. Evan felt his face flush, a mix of embarrassment and confusion washing over him. He hadn't meant to cross any lines. He hadn't even known there were lines to cross. What hurt most wasn't the accusation itself. but the realization that his intentions had been misunderstood. He backed away from the fence that morning feeling smaller than he had in years. For the rest of the day, he replayed the moment over and over, wondering where he'd gone wrong. Every smile, every offer of help, every shared laugh suddenly felt suspect in his own mind. He questioned himself in a way he hadn't since losing his wife, wondering if he'd forgotten how to exist around others without causing discomfort. The community reacted faster than he expected. By afternoon, the shift in energy was palpable. Neighbors who once waved warmly now offered stiff nods. Conversations hushed when he walked by. He caught fragments of whispers, nothing concrete, but enough to know he was being discussed. Being a single parent already came with a sense of isolation, but this was different. This was being quietly judged, not for his parenting, but for his humanity. Evan's first instinct was to withdraw completely. He focused inward, pouring all his energy into his son, Elias, who was 8 years old and wise beyond his years. Elias noticed the change immediately. He noticed his father's silence, the way his shoulders slumped, the way he stopped lingering outside. Children have an uncanny ability to sense emotional shifts, even when adults try to hide them. Evan tried to compensate with extra attention, more games, more reassurance, but the weight of the situation followed him everywhere. Days passed, and the tension on Juniper Lane grew thicker. Marisol, for her part, kept her distance. She wasn't unkind, but she was guarded. Evan could see that her words had come from her own place of pressure. She, too, had noticed the looks, the whispers, the assumptions. Being a woman living alone had already put her under scrutiny, and the added attention made her uncomfortable. Her reaction hadn't been about Evan as much as it had been about survival in a community that watched too closely. What changed everything wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public apology. It was a series of small, deliberate choices Evan made after that morning. Instead of retreating into bitterness or resentment, he chose reflection. He chose restraint. He stopped initiating interactions, but he didn't let the situation harden him. When kindness was needed, he offered it quietly, without expectation. He helped an elderly neighbor fix a mailbox without announcing it. He volunteered at his son's school, focusing on the children rather than adult opinions. He showed up consistently, not loudly, but reliably. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. People noticed the way Evan never missed a school event. They saw how he knelt to his son's level, listening with full attention. They observed the patience with which he navigated tantrums, the pride he showed at small achievements. The image of him as a misunderstood figure started to replace the earlier assumptions. Actions, after all, speak in ways rumors never can. Marisol watched this transformation from a distance. She noticed how Evan didn't harbor visible resentment, how he treated everyone with the same quiet respect he always had. She saw the effort he put into being present for his son, and it stirred something in her that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with admiration. She began to question her own reaction, replaying that morning in her mind, wondering if she'd been too quick to assume. Their paths crossed again one afternoon under the open daylight, both of them drawn outside by the sound of laughter. Elias was playing with other neighborhood children, his joy unfiltered and contagious. Marisol watched as Evan joined the game, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant, laughter crinkling the corners of his eyes. In that moment, she saw him not as the subject of whispers, but as a man doing his best in a world that rarely made room for grace. From that point on, something subtle shifted between them. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just a soft easing of tension, a nod that lingered a second longer, a shared smile when the kids did something ridiculous. Trust rebuilt itself quietly, brick by brick, through shared experiences rather than words. The community, too, began to recalibrate. The drama that once seemed so compelling lost its appeal as people grew bored of speculation and more interested in the tangible reality unfolding before them. Potlucks were organized. Children formed friendships that ignored adult narratives. Small gestures of inclusion replaced exclusion. The street began to feel like a neighborhood again rather than a collection of watchful eyes. Over time, Evan and Marisol found themselves part of a unique, evolving family dynamic, not defined by labels or expectations, but by shared values and mutual respect. Marisol became a familiar presence in Elias's life, offering encouragement with his art projects, attending school events as a supportive friend. Evan, in turn, respected boundaries, understanding that connection didn't have to be rushed to be meaningful. The real shock to the community came not from scandal, but from growth. People were surprised by how the situation resolved itself without conflict, by how compassion replaced judgment, by how two individuals navigated misunderstanding with maturity and patience. It challenged the assumptions many had held, forcing them to reflect on their own roles in creating unnecessary drama. As months passed, Juniper Lane settled into a new rhythm. The story that once fueled whispers became an example of resilience and quiet dignity. Evan found his confidence returning, not because he'd proven anyone wrong, but because he'd stayed true to himself. He learned that being misunderstood didn't require self-erasure, only self-assurance. Marisol learned that speaking from fear could close doors she didn't intend to shut, and that openness, when paired with boundaries, created space for genuine connection. In the end, what bound them wasn't romance born of flirtation, but a shared understanding forged through adversity. Their bond, still developing and undefined, was rooted in trust, respect, and a commitment to kindness. Elias thrived in this environment, surrounded by adults who modeled empathy and resilience, absorbing lessons that would shape him far beyond childhood. As the sun set on another bright day, Evan stood on his porch watching his son ride his scooter down the street, laughter echoing in the warm air. He felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. The shock, the pain, the scrutiny had all led him here, to a place of deeper self-awareness and connection. He understood now that kindness wasn't about how it was perceived, but about how it was lived, consistently, and without expectation of reward. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the power of patience, understanding, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who might need it, and stay connected with Kindness Matters. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Before we close, we have one special request. Please comment the word kindness below if you believe that even in moments of misunderstanding, compassion can change everything. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to being misunderstood isn't anger or retreat. It's choosing to remain kind in the daylight, where everyone can see it.